My name is Kate Morant, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you on behalf of Poet in the City to My Wound Was an Exhibit, an exploration of the power of art in times of protest. For those of you who don't know us, Poet in the City is an organisation that brings poetry to life beyond books. We produce experiences and shows which ensure that poetry reaches people in meaningful and changing ways. Our work includes classic and contemporary poetry performances and conversations that address major issues, ideas, and people. We use poetry to animate cultural moments and to explore ideas past and present, and we create dynamic poetry experiences in major arts venues and unusual spaces. Importantly, Poet in the City supports young people aged 16 to 25 through the Poet in the City Producers Programme. I'm lucky enough to be taking part in this programme along with the other producers who've worked on tonight's event, Laura, Esther, Chris, and Tasmia. Our event this evening features performances and discussion inspired by the socially engaged work of artist and activist Bahia Shahab. We were all inspired by Shahab's ability to harness art as a means of protest, drawing on her 1,000 Times No project to create impactful street art that she felt could speak louder than she could during the Egyptian Revolution in 2011. Her work demonstrates the power of art to inspire and explain the need for protest, to challenge norms and imposed systems, and to navigate censorship. Tonight, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome 4 brilliant contributors whose work speaks to the revolutionary spirit of Bahia's own. Performing and joining our panel are contemporary poets Ola El Hassan and Zad El Basha, and musician Kareem Samara. Hosting our panel this evening is Salma El Watni. Ola El Hassan is a Sudanese poet and electrical engineer who grew up in Denmark and Sudan. Her poetry explores identity through community, culture, and music. She has read poems at the Roundhouse and the Ace Hotel Shoreditch, and recently featured in Boxed In. Zad El Basha's work combines their political and community-building experience with Middle Eastern poetic traditions to write on migration, sexual trauma, and sexual and gender identity. They won the London Writers' Award this year for their narrative nonfiction work, and have previously won Italy's biggest poetry slam. Kareem Samara is a multi-instrumentalist, improviser, composer, and political organizer. His particular area of interest is in diasporic identity and the decolonial possibilities of sound and music, with particular focus on sonic representations of place and time. As well as performing as a solo artist using traditional Arabic instruments and electronics, Kareem is a serial collaborator with musicians and poets worldwide. Hosting our panel and also performing this evening is writer, poet, and activist Salma El Watni. Born in Egypt and raised in north of England, Salma returned to Cairo at the time of the Arab Spring. Between protesting and fighting in the revolution, she began blogging about her experiences, discussing womanhood, and exploring the tumultuous identity of being female, of colour, and Muslim. Since coming back to the UK, she has set up an international business, worked with Edinburgh University on the Dangerous Woman Project, and collaborated with the British Library and Wellcome Collection. It's an exciting lineup, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ola El Hassan to the stage.
Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Ola El Hassan. And I'll just start my first poem. I'll mention that it was inspired by the title of Mahmoud Darwish's poem, I Come From There. There's a line specifically that struck me. I learned all the words worthy of the cord of blood so that I could break the rule. And just reading that inspired me. So yeah, this is I Come From. I come from a sea of grandmothers, morning lives spent worrying about tomorrows that were never guaranteed, spent sweating over the smoke of faham under a sun, poking so sharply they never relaxed enough muscles to carry a throaty laughter. I come from an ocean of red, in the form of blood-streaking memories where nostalgia is a slippery cliff, You will always fall from unprepared, never jump from trustingly. I come from within a line, drawn in the sand from a boardroom, a coin toss of fate, where a gun to your head will still be labeled your fault, your choice. Why did you? Why didn't you? You. I come from a baby sister, whose favorite word was no. At 3 years old, 6, 20, who when tired of drawing inside the lines with her right hand painted outside them with her left, whose silence was a measured observation, whose words were rarely spoken, dispersed with intention, whose refusal to comply choked her with tear gas, who took the Hippocratic oath and defied it only with empathy at her Pete's rounds, whose sisterhood is an action, whose inaction is a statement, who never fit a mold, and instead sculpted her own in abstract eyelashes and butterflies. I come from a baby brother, whose hairstyles were chosen from his high school's list of reasons for detention, whose music in the old Toyota landed him a night in jail, whose resistance was unnamed and unspoken, enacted in comedic skits in our living room, and yelled at the dusty Maidan outside school, outside our first home, our second, third, fourth home, whose revolution was one of thought but loud enough to provoke his teacher's whip, who learned to count out loud in Arabic by the number of lashes to his skin, who hid a note in his shoe, chanted 1,000 steps at the Million March. His silent legacy, a dedication to Darfur and a farewell in one breath, a statement which a billion of my poems will never articulate. I come from where children are buried in their school uniforms, where school uniforms are military camo, where schools are militant, where children are never children, never allowed the luxury of a childhood, where childhood is a luxury, where childhood is elitist and classist, where children are never children. Never children, never children. I come from where subtle patience is a word manipulated into compliance, a chorus of idioms passed down, jinn and ta'arfu, better a demon you know, except we know our demons. And even when assigned to us at birth and given to us as last names, eat with us, sleep with us, they are still demons. And what has quiet loyalty ever brought us, other than extinction? So when I wrote that poem, I was thinking a lot about my brother and sister, and they were both very active during the revolution in Sudan, and I just really liked the way that for the first time in a long time I thought about how my baby sister's favorite word was no, and that's something we used to laugh at, but now in this context it just means so much more. Okay. The next poem is called They Left and We Arrived, and it tries to tell the story of how within our family we've left Sudan and come back and left, and in different generations it's happened in different ways. They left and we arrived. The men left and we had no choice but to follow. 1930, a tiny version of Jittu walks down Subberber with his hapoba, follows the sound of young chanting, asks in the curious voice of childhood if he can join his hapoba, pulling him back to a Sirat al-Mustaqim the next day, ready to escape. Tiny Jittu runs away, sits down in the khalwa, making it his, and that was his first leaving. And he continued after that, each time adding more diplomas to his lists of reasons for abandoning Wad Sayyidina, Khartoum, London, dragging my hapoba, now leaving behind her sisters, brothers and mother, then Edinburgh, Mama's infant feet scurrying to catch up. And we never stopped leaving since. Leaving behind Shams al-Asr, gently filling the house with tea for gossip, with grey rooms in grey buildings under grey skies, leaving behind long conversations while picking out the good cumin seeds, for monthly phone calls as short as the money would reach, leaving behind the tales of silk tobes, lavishly signaling celebration for updates on Filana's wedding mumbled quickly between tearful exhales. Haboba, leaving behind slowly waking to Yasmin-scented mornings in Akbara for agitated crowds in grimy red bus rush hour. And here I am, generations later, still not finished leaving, a daughter of people, always alone, listening out for heartbeats across bodies of water, trying to forget a home I never found. But we've arrived, and their leaving sacrifices are in full bloom. A generation of tears scattered across time zones and free voice call apps. A generation scrambling to prove the first leaving right. A generation of fluidity in languages undefined. Of spare change collected for expensive flights back looking for home in moments that pass us by. Never giving us time to move in. A natural-haired woman, eyes smiling at my twist out. A tall young man, queuing, impatient to see Black Panther. A mother, dragging a toddler down the road, fuchsia satin ribbons collecting her curls. Songs with lyrics we can't translate but understand. The drums of the diaspora's melody map. The smell of food floating onto the pavement from the Ethiopian restaurant. A passerby saying Azola into her phone. Desperately gathering bites of our intersections, plastering them together into collages, making up four walls, under a ceiling of grandmother's prayers covering us from tears. And that is now home. Thank you.
When I first saw Bahia Shahib's work, the first thing that really hit me about it was the way in which she was just claiming public space as a space where she could create things and make things and like influence the world in a way that felt like I always almost kind of jumped back when I saw that. So it was like, I experience public space so often as a queer woman of colour, as a hostile space. And from that perspective, seeing it used as not a hostile space, as an active space of creation is so, so important. And so these poems are actually about it being a hostile space, which then brings up the importance of that. So the first poem is actually a version of a poem written by Hafsa bint al-Hajj al-Raquniya, who is a woman who wrote in like 1000 AD. And she wrote this poem in response to a poem by her lover, when her lover was like, oh, so nice when we spend the night together, I see all the birds singing and the world is smiling at us, blah, blah, blah. And she was just like, I don't think so. And this is what she thinks. And it's called, We love life, if only we had access to it. When we walk to the garden, the leaves do not smile at us. They are green with envy, spitting bile. When we walk to the river, the water does not bubble in joy for us. The dove coos with spite. You're good. You live in this world. That doesn't mean this world is good, though you think it does. The sky sets the stars on fire, bright, just to spy on us. And then I have another poem on a similar topic, but that is just me rather than a translation. This is the trio I stood as still as possible to convince them I was a thing and not an enemy. This is the square, clean, with 4 trees on each side. Here, I know every edge, where every corner is. I know exactly where to put my feet. This is the corner where they threw a stone. It hit me above the hip and left a purple half moon, which later turned blue and later still, yellow. This is where they stood around me in a circle, coming so close I could not even see the trees, and only barely above their gelled hair a patch of sky. This is where they spat, fiddling with their zippers. This is where they talked about jobs, immigrants, homosexuality, and how to burn cigarettes on my skin. This is where I learned that being a thing is what makes you the enemy. But it's been long enough for me to pity these streets and these boys with their anger and their sudden groping hands. But a man follows me, sneering. I quicken my step and hide in a coffee shop from a sugar packet. The face of Mussolini glares at me. I hold it in my hand, a thing holding a thing. I shake the sugar, feel its granules, feel my fingertips on it. It reminds me I am not a thing and I am angry, and in this moment, their anger is mine. It is a small comfort, a small sense of belonging. And then I have two short poems that are about a lot of Bahir's work is about heroism and the things that happen to heroes and everything that we do for revolutions to happen. And when I say that as someone who does a lot of activism, I have to think about everything that we lose from having to go through all this fight. So the first poem is called, after Bahir's work of 1001 No's, No to the Blinding of Heroes. The hero wants to dip his toes into a fresh spring, flinch as the cold water laps his waist, smile, splash a friend. The hero wants to land on a hot stone, lie on a hot stone, dangle his feet grazing the water, and let his stomach burn, just a little. The hero wants to rest in the fresh spring for no reason other than it's nice. But the hero is at the spring for a moment of breath between a friend who died fighting on a train crossing over the Alps, burnt as he hid in the electrical cabinet, and a friend who died fighting, stepped out of the house back home onto a dirty street with 1,000 sweaty bodies chanting for freedom, Harriya, 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 Harriya. The hero is at the spring to wash his face, to close his eyes, to breathe. Because you need to rest to get ready for battle. But the hero is tired of fight. He is tired of hope. He does not want to go to the spring to heal. He wants to go to the spring for no reason other than it's nice. And the final one is called You Can Crush the Flowers, but you can't delay the spring, after Bahir's work. You can't delay the spring, but you can crush the flower. This morning dew gathers on the tip of its petal. It is one, trembling, a flower. The hero rubs the dew off with his little finger, touches it to his forehead, his flower. The hero moved it with its soil to a spot with more warmer sunlight. A flower. The hero watered it day by day, gave it special nutritional liquid. One flower. The flower he loved, you can crush the flower. The hero cries today, you can crush the flower. The hero cries today. He is tired of hope. Thank you.
It's so lovely to be here. Thank you all for coming out, especially on a miserable rainy night, because I know that always cuts audience things in half because we're British. So we're going to dive into a panel with all of our incredible poets and performers and artists in a very short moment. I just thought it'd be good to give you a little bit of introduction to who I am, so you don't just have a stranger talking at you for a little while, and kind of what we're going to cover in the panel. I'm half Egyptian, half Irish. I think it said I was born in Egypt, came to England when I was about 5. I was raised in Newcastle upon Tyne in the north of England, so I'm always culturally confused. And after university, I moved back to Cairo. I was on this big plight to find my Egyptian identity. So I thought I'd find it in Cairo. So I trotted off to Cairo, worked on a farm and a horse ranch for a while because, you know, why not? I'm such a pacer as well. I'm going to be all over this room by the end of it. And then I had enough of milking cows and tending sheep. So I thought I'm going to go and I'm going to move to the city and I'm going to move to Cairo and I'm going to get a job in international business and I'm going to start my career and it's going to be great. I moved to Cairo on the 24th of January 2011, which is significant if you all know your history, because the revolution kicked off on the 25th of January 2011. And at the time, I'd been living in Egypt already for about 5 months, and the British Embassy sent emails out to all of the citizens who were currently in Egypt, and they put a plane on and they kind of said, we're recalling, we advise that you leave the country because it's not safe and it was getting increasingly dangerous. And I had a few expat friends at the time, and all their parents and family members were kind of like, you need to leave the country immediately, and I kind of got them plane tickets and got them home. And my mother called me, this is my Irish mother, by the way, and said in very fluent Arabic, she said, get down to the street and go and fight for your country, or don't come home. And I was like, okay, great, cool. So I trotted down to Tahrir, fought in the revolution, did a lot of protesting, I'm a writer, so I did a lot of political blogging, a lot of kind of changing the narrative of kind of some misinformation that was happening in Western media, put everything on social media wherever I could to kind of document what was going on. And I ended up living in Cairo for about 2.5 years and kind of being part of the whole revolutionary process. So I guess that's my tie to resistance, art and revolution. And I think this conversation is a really prevalent one that we're having right now. And I was walking the other day with an incredible poet, Joelle Taylor, and we were talking about poetry, and I said, I feel like there's a real resurgence of poetry. Poetry's having a real renaissance, and we're interested in it now in ways that we weren't before, perhaps. Or I know that when I was a kid growing up, it wasn't as kind of prolific, and unless you were studying the canon or you had like this real academic interest in poetry, you didn't just get poets everywhere that I feel that you do now. And I said to Jo, I said, why do you think poetry is having this kind of second birth, or whatever, it's having this renaissance? And she just looked at me and said really calmly, and she said, well, the world's burning, and the world needs the poets now more than ever, and it's the last free art form that we have. It's the last place that you can go and just turn up and be like, hey, I'm a poet, I'm going to get on this mic and I'm going to give a poem. You can't go to the opera and join in. You can't join in at the ballet or the theatre or any other art form. And you generally need an instrument if you want to join in with a band or whatever. But poetry, if you've got some feelings that are bursting out of your chest, you can write a few lines, a few stanzas down, you can go to any open mic in London and just sign up and be part of the conversation. And I think that's really interesting when there is so much going on. And like Joel said, the world is burning and we can hear the sirens, and there's so much when it's physically burning and metaphorically burning. And now more than ever, the artists, the painters, the poets, the music makers, all the people who have a way of saying something that I think in such tumultuous times, we find it quite hard to vocalize. And then until someone says something, you ever have that feeling when you read a poem and you're like, oh, that's what I feel, but I couldn't say it. So I think this is a really incredibly interesting conversation to have, and it's very timely. Without further ado, that was a lot of ado, without any more ado, please welcome to the panel Kareem, Ola and Zaid. So, what I wanted to kick off with first, and actually my first question that I think for all of you would be really interesting to hear, just as well so that the audience can get to know you guys and your work a little bit more. But what I would like to know is, how does your work act as a resistance, and what fight are you fighting? Because I know that for a lot of artists, they can often be concerned with one particular fight, whether it's, gender or race or something to do with their particular country. Or so what would be really interesting is kind of how do you feel that your art form acts as a resistance? And also, what fight are you fighting? You have a microphone there, so why don't we kick off with you?
Hello, yes. Start with the what fight are you fighting, which I think is a very, very, very hard question to answer for me. Because of where I stand identity-wise in more than one way, all of these different fights, as in feminism, LGBT rights, the liberation from capitalism, etc., are all this one and the same fight. I think the fight is essentially to live in a world where exploitation and oppression are not the main system that makes the world function. That's very nice to say in general. Of course, in practice, that means a lot of energy is going in a lot of different directions, which is hard. And I do not have an easy answer to it, but unfortunately, I don't think we can compartmentalize these fights at all. But it is exactly from how exhausting this fight is for so many people, for so many reasons. People who are just activists, and most people who are just stuck in a really shit situation because we live in a terrible, terrible world. And it's very disheartening, and being able to have the power to continue and to keep doing this fight means we need to have something tender and living and good in our life that we can come back to when we're like, this is hopeless, like we can't succeed. Because often, I want us to succeed. I hope you're all registered to vote. The deadline is tonight.
Got a few more hours, guys. Midnight.
Yeah, midnight, please vote Labour. Sorry.
Not at all.
Yeah, as I was saying, when losing is a possibility, and when you're feeling very hopeless or disheartened, and when you lose, because at times you lose because we're fighting against very powerful enemies, you need something warm and good to come back to. And that can be human beings, that can be cooking, and that can be art. And often art is also all of these things. Like, the art is not just you sitting in your room writing a poem. The art is the communities and networks and people that are involved in all of this. It's like all of us talking to each other, and then all of us supporting each other because we've talked to each other and making this art together, growing these networks. And all these networks are networks of resistance that we could not create if we did not have a tool like art to create them.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go to you next.
Sure. So I've been thinking about this question since you asked it, and I don't think I have an answer yet. Using just a really broad explanation, I would say just the right to exist as you are is probably the fight, because I'm trying to figure out how to exist and to allow myself to exist, step away from all the fear-based decisions that are just, the way you walk down the pavement and what career you choose, all of that. A lot of the time it's very fear-based when you come from a community, a community or communities that are marginalized in this world today. And I think art is usually just a way that we express ourselves. And I think it just so happens that we're expressing the pain that we're feeling, but also the joy sometimes. It's really difficult when you're used to writing poems about something that's tough and that's difficult. But then I found a lot of joy in writing poems about joy, imagining what joy looks like, what peace looks like, what love looks like, and I'm really grateful that I'm now in a position where I'm able to balance those two ways of writing. I don't know if I answered your question, but I mean,
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And I really like how you both kind of referred to your work as these like safe havens and places to find joy, especially when you're so engaged in a fight. I think that's a really lovely way of looking at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would echo everything that has just been said, really. For me, I'm not a poet, so I use sound and music. I guess that the sound represents something that words can't for me, and that as resistance, it is resisting a lot of what is expected of perhaps Middle Eastern instruments, someone of mixed background living in London, what people expect of you, what you expect of yourself, a constant dialogue. So you'll see that it's quite, there's a lot of ideas that come out, so a lot of the times I have many ideas and often they all come out at the same time, so the sound is quite a battleground for that, really. And it was like, why? What's the other bit of the question? I don't even know if that answered one bit of the question, to be honest.
It was kind of, I think you did in terms of kind of what does your
fight?
art do, right?
What's the fight?
What is your fight?
What is my fight? I believe that if you've got a voice or you've got a way of making something heard, it's your responsibility to say something about the world that you live in. And as your friend said, the world is burning. And I guess that the fight that would have perhaps started me in making political art or art very much influenced by political goings on is narrative and amplifying voices that don't have much volume in the Western world where I am. So it would have started with Palestine, and then it was quite soon after becoming active in Palestinian organising here, I was in the Egyptian Revolution as well. So then that became my way of navigating spaces and talking about that and learning Egyptian political songs from however many decades ago that were being sung in the revolution and are now still being sung in Lebanon and Iraq and Sudan. So I guess it's that initial fight for the voiceless, really. And also that exists here as well. So I'm really glad that you told everyone to register to vote, because because one of the parties is really going to clamp down on how we start to resist and show solidarity in this country. So that's important.
Yeah, timely reminders. Thank you very much. What I want to know is, and I think Bahia talks about this in her work. Protest art and resistance art often gets removed, it gets painted over. She talks about, I don't know how many of you guys have kind of engaged with her work, but she talks about the wall that she'd done stencils on and how many times different people, whether it was government or different artists, had come to this wall and continually painted over or altered the paintings that were already there and changed the messaging of what was happening in those paintings. And things kind of get burned, books get burned, things get erased, things die out, they remove. Once kind of, I know, for example, when I was in Tahrir, there was so much happening, but once the revolution was finished, things got painted over and taken down and just were erased from that space. And this is a question, any of you feel free to dive in, but what long-lasting outcome can resistance art really have? Someone's got to, I don't want to name and shame, someone's going to just speak out. Kareem, you have a mic, so you may as well go.
Okay. I would say I have a big conflict with the idea of making resistance art in terms of the way that it's often capitalised on and marketed and revolutionary chic. But, you still... Anyway. It's about, if you're making revolutionary art, like I do believe that you have a responsibility then also to your community and to the rest of your life and how you live that. how you live that life. But I would say that revolutionary art shows a snapshot of what is going on at the time, that without art of any form is often lost. So for example, the photographs of the different kinds of art that was in Tahrir Square at that time, the writing down by Mahmoud Darwish of what was happening at that point to him or to the Palestinian people within that poem, then the turning of that into the music and song by Sabrine, who can convey his emotion of that time of being in Palestine in like the early 80s, etc., is something that we would lose without the art. And I was watching an interview with Bahia, and she said that she's getting students coming into her classes who have no experience of the revolution. And so, as much as I was between here and there for post-revolutionary Egypt, any kind of art or any kind of talking I would do would definitely be to remind people of what went down and what happened. So in my sound work, you'll hear, I'll just make sure I play it, a Ghassan Kanafani interview that was lost for years with an Australian interviewer. Many of you may have heard it on YouTube, but you know, it was recorded before he died or was killed, and he sums up the Palestinian cause in a way that still no one has done since. And if it wasn't for his writings and his work and the art of preserving that moment, we wouldn't know what he thought. We wouldn't have that clarity on that situation at the time.
So it's very much as long as the art is preserved, then it can continue.
Not necessarily. The snapshot, because also we could get into like oral tradition and the idea that like it's very Western and very academic to preserve and to make books of and to make products of. Oral tradition constantly lives with memory. So the Sheikh Imam songs that you might have heard from Egypt, a lot of those people who know those songs and sing those songs do not have a tape or a CD or before videos came out of Sheikh Imam, but they would have heard those songs sung by other people. So there's then the question of oral tradition, yes.
Okay, that's you.
When I saw the word temporary next to revolutionary art, I started getting a little bit uncomfortable because nothing is ever temporary, at least from my perspective. So even if you paint something or you write something and it helps you in the moment to express yourself, even if nobody sees it, that for me is enough. It has done its job, you know, and then different forms of art will then impact more and they will trigger more thought. So even if a book has been destroyed after it's been read, after it's been talked about, then that never dies out because people will always be impacted by it.
It still had impact in the moment, right?
Yeah,
and it still did its job at the time.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then at the same time, obviously we want to archive as much as possible, especially when it is when it's thinking against the system or the norm. We want to try to archive as much as possible. But if it doesn't happen, does it mean that its values gone
less, right?
Yeah.
And that archive could happen in the same way that Kareem said, in terms of the oral tradition, in terms of passing it down. It doesn't necessarily always have to be in a museum or a gallery for it to kind of continue in our memories. I'm just going to throw it to you there, but changing the question a little bit and kind of reframing it. There's always the idea that when we're trying to, sorry, I don't know if you guys have a really loud voice, I figure that everyone can hear it. When we're talking about affecting change, because like you've all mentioned and touched upon, you live in systems that are kind of working against the struggles that you guys are going through. And when we're trying to create change, we talk about the fact that we need legislation, because legislation affects change and it changes systems. And again, in a similar vein to the question I just asked, what can art really do to affect change? Because can it change legislation? Because a lot of people would argue that protest art or resistance art doesn't change legislation.
Well, I would, first of all, I don't think all change needs to come through legislative processes. I think change has a lot of ways of happening, and often legal ways are not the most effective or most deep or radical ways of affecting that change. But so I'll take it a few steps back, then I'll come back to where you're at. Sorry. Because what I think is, basically I think any sort of revolutionary thought, any sort of progress, the left basically, is a creative effort. It is the effort of being able to imagine a future that is different from the future we are in. We're not trying to keep things the same and just kind of survive and just get on with it, or like manage to succeed in this world. It's the power to just actually trust your own creativity and positively imagine a whole new world and then fight for it. And I think art has the huge responsibility of imagining these worlds. And not only that, but also in terms of revolutionary art, in terms of people, artists expressing a revolutionary moment, of preserving that history in a way that means that we can come back to it. We can imagine it because we know it happened. Because that's not the history that is going to be written down by white Oxford professor man who is like, this is what happened in the 19th century. And if we just take that as history, then that shuts down our possibility of creativity, shuts down our possibility of imagination, and we cannot affect change, really, without imagination. And I think for any kind of like practical change to happen, you need the people there believing in it and thinking and imagining, affecting that change. Like you don't just like end up in parliament and vote for something if you haven't first imagined a thing to propose, a thing to vote for, or if you haven't had people on the streets screaming at you until you decide to vote for them.
Right, so I'm going to kind of peel that apart a little bit, because you said it doesn't always have to be legislative, right? True, but when I say legislative, forgive me, I'll correct myself, what I mean is practical change, whether it's laws, whether it's systemic, whether it's new organisations popping up, whether it needs something. We can't just talk about a revolution, there has to be something practical that happens, because for me, like, a lot of the Egyptian revolution was incredible, and Egyptians can chat, they can really chat, they tell a good tale, and it was amazing, but there was a huge power vacuum that kind of a bit chaotic, and no one really knew what was happening because there wasn't a clear leader. So there still needs to be these structural things. So perhaps, correct me, would you say then that the art is the way of imagining, is the catalyst, is the beginning of that process of imagining what a new world looks like, and then it kind of incentivizes people to act for change, and that's when then practical change can happen? Do they work hand in hand, the practical and the imagination?
I think they need to work hand in hand, and I think we need both, as in we cannot think that by writing some poems and hanging out at the theatre we're going to change the world. We're not. We need to be doing the real work on the ground, we need to be doing the practical work, the political work, the work. But yes, I do believe they need to go hand in hand, because we're not going to do that work unless there's something sparing us to, and unless there's something holding us during it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go to you to ask you this question. What does protest art and resistance art do that perhaps conventional or traditional campaigning doesn't?
That's a really big question. I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is when I first started open micing and someone came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you so much for sharing that, because I always thought it was just me." And that's really powerful. That's such a beautiful purpose to be able to express like that, because it validates people's feelings and emotions and fears. And I think for me personally, when somebody expresses something and I feel validated and I realize, oh, I'm not alone, it is not just me, that's a really, to steal a word that was just used, that's a really good catalyst. It starts you off, and then you start thinking, oh, okay, well, if it's not just me, then we need to do something about it, because this is not fair. And then that kind of cascades outward. So yeah, I think when it comes to resistance art, when you're able to validate somebody's feelings and fears and the injustice that happens, and a conversation starts from there, that's very powerful. And I don't think traditional art that tries to steer away from being political will ever be able to do something like that.
Thank you. I think that's pertinent actually, and a lot of the time I often find, I don't know if this is true for anyone else, but I find traditional forms of campaigning or changing law or protesting are often quite unemotional, and they're quite process-driven and methodical. You go through this channel and then this channel, and then we'll all meet here and we'll all protest at this time, and it can get very efficient and clinical, I sometimes find, which I always feel, I think that what you really said is really pertinent actually. It gives space for people to go, oh my god, I feel this too, and I didn't know anyone else was feeling it. Karim, I want to throw something to you because you've already touched on it. And the question I already had here, so I think it's really interesting that you've already mentioned it, is once protester art or resistance art is housed in galleries or becomes mainstream or arguably becomes part of the establishment, does it lose credibility? I thought about making it easy, and then I thought, why bother?
No, but it's a really good way of testing the credibility of the people who put it there and the people who were showing it.
Say more?
So like, I mean, if it's good revolutionary art or it's art that came from actual, like, again, I really don't want to like just throw that term around like revolutionary art. You know, like there are people putting their lives on the line, and like we're talking about like life or death situations, and we're talking about, you know, behaviours in a position. Somehow I don't know, like, you know, she's not been arrested for the work that she's done, and it's public what she's done. There are a lot of people, especially in Egypt at the moment, so I don't want to necessarily. I just wanted to make that point. If the art itself came out at a time and came from a place, it's usually not for entertainment, and you can usually tell if that art form or that art piece has been made to capitalise on something at that time. Like a lot of post-Egyptian revolution songs and videos were obviously like, I've made my name in the revolution and now I'm going to capitalise on that and make a living. There's part of me that's like, well, you know, you're nearly killed by the security forces, so maybe good for you at the same time. But there's something in me that then also questions the rest of the career and the rest of the moment. And again, you can look at someone like Marcel Khalifa, I guess, as someone who used to play Martyrs Square in Lebanon and still plays those songs when he plays in a concert hall. And those songs are the soundtracks to revolutions for a lot of people, and those songs are still being played now. So I don't think they lose, as pieces lose credibility. I think that choices made afterwards by the artist or by the people marking it, their credibility is in question, I think.
Okay, thank you. Zad, I want to shoot over to you for this next question. When we're talking about resistant art and protest art, we often talk about it in terms of things that are happening now or that have happened, or the art that has been born out of these changes that we've seen in our lifetime. How powerful do you think resistance art can be to change history, in terms of how can we not rewrite history because we can't, but how can we start talking about it and change the narrative, whether that's in terms of colonization or things that we weren't perhaps part of at the time, and what role can art play in changing those conversations now?
Good question.
I mean, none of them are small.
True. I think basically, I had a thing to say.
Take your time.
The problem with approaching art in a way that doesn't include history is that actually, without including history, we're not actually really including the present, as in we're not outside of history. We're not, like, it's not like history happened and then there's us. And I believe that we cannot make good political art unless we are fully involved in the present, fully involved in the politics of the present, acting within it. And in order to be acting within it, really, we need to be aware of it as a historical place. It's not the end of history. And it's so important for that to happen, that we look back at everything that's happened before that, take the fights that happened before us, take the people that have lived and the people that have suffered, and all the terrible shit that has gone down, and see how it speaks to us and how that brings us here and how that still goes on today. Like, in a very... I've grown up in Italy, which has a pretty big fascist problem. And a lot of that comes from the fact that once Mussolini was hanged, Italians declared fascism to be over, when in fact fascists were people who were in Mussolini's government continued being in the Italian government when he died. It didn't end, it just kept on going, just like slightly less openly calling itself fascist at times. Sometimes it's still calling itself fascist. And then when it comes back in full force, you can't be like surprised, because it's not like history ended and now nothing happened and now anything like that. And I think art plays a huge role in keeping that memory alive and in keeping the relationship between what's happening now and what's happened in the past alive, and showing the continuity of it and what still happened. That goes for so many things. Like, obvious example, colonialism, still going on, never stopped. Can't understand how it's still going on if you don't understand how it started and what was going on all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. It all informs each other, I think. I want to ask this last question to you guys before I throw it out to the audience if anyone has any questions. And this is a question for all of you. You're all from various different countries and different worlds and come from a plethora of places, but you're all from countries that have fought revolutions or are currently fighting revolutions. Obviously, the Sudanese revolutions happened, we had the Egyptian revolution in 2011, Lebanon and Beirut is currently going through their revolution. And you know, you're all part of either the diaspora or being in different places in different worlds. How responsible do you feel to like get on a plane and go home and fight in those revolutions? And obviously I know you were there. I think you said you were in Sudan at the time, but your family said it wasn't safe and you didn't go out and protest. And the people that I've talked to who are part of different worlds, one of the complexities of that is that it's kind of, well, do I stay here or should I go home and fight? But also, I haven't lived there for X amount of years, so actually am I just going to be more in the way, and am I going to be some kind of Western spectator instead of, like, how responsible do you feel to be part of those fights? Like, so Kareem, for you, if you hadn't have been in Cairo at the time by accident for a wedding, would you have got on a plane and gone back and fight in that revolution because it's your country and you're somehow tied to it?
I think that I would have tried to go back for family, because one thing, and maybe I wouldn't have known that then, but being away from a problem is a hell of a lot worse than being in it. When it comes to like protests, like you hear the amount of misinformation that comes, having been there from the 25th of January onwards, and then afterwards being here watching different news channels, and then being on the phone trying to go, I heard they've come into your street, I've heard, blah, blah, blah. There's a guy who just said that this prison next to you has been broken open and there's thieves, you know, all these kind of things. It's a lot easier to be there and not to be panicking about that thing and maybe to concentrate on the politics of it. But at the same time, I would go to protest, and mainly to have a discussion with people. It was kind of weird being in Egypt before the revolution, because it was, as being Palestinian from Egypt, which is kind of complicated, but you're kind of a bit embarrassed by Egyptian politics. And when you ever had to try and discuss the Middle East with an Egyptian, this is very generalised, please don't like shoot me, but in the grand scheme of things, talking politics with an Egyptian, especially perhaps very privileged Egyptians, it didn't go down very well. So like the revolution sparked that. So to actually be there and have conversations about the world and colonialism, and you know, even like Sudan, which is like, you know, just one country south, you know, it was the same country at once upon a time. Like, you know, people don't know about like history, for example. So I was close to getting, I was already there. Palestine I couldn't go back to for political reasons. But then with the Palestinian revolution, I don't think I was particularly useful because I had a lot more of an Egyptian identity. So in Palestine, not only am I from London, but then I've also got an Egyptian accent when I speak, so no one ever thinks I'm Palestinian. Right. But then actually I do believe that you don't have to go back, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because there's people on the ground who can do it and do it a lot better than you. So it's a lot better that you stay where you are and keep fighting, because there's a big fight going on here. And the idea that like we would come, and the amount of discussion since 2011 about the Arab Spring, and so then everyone ignoring everything that's going on in the UK and all the huge different aspects of oppression that's going on in UK site, and then Europe, you know. So it's probably more important to look at as your kind of inspiration, but then really look then at where you are and how that's what's going on in your country, or the country of your residence.
Fight on a home front.
Yeah.
What's next?
I have a really, really big answer. But in its essence, no, I don't believe that you have a responsibility to get on a flight. I believe that whatever you have the capacity to do. And that's very simple. And that's not something that I came to accept easily. So while the revolution was happening, I was experiencing a lot of guilt, and my therapist had to basically just bully the guilt out of me. But because my family was there and they were fighting, and I have a lot of family members and friends who were very deeply involved in opposition from before the revolution ever happened. So people that were constantly arrested. One of the people very close to me was on a hit list at some point. And instead what I was doing was I was trying to find safe places for her to hide during the revolution. I was documenting a lot of the protests that were happening here in London, and it was really beautiful to see people back in Sudan commenting, sharing it with each other, saying, oh look, they're doing this in London, because we didn't have internet.
Right.
And they were seeing these videos and these pictures, and they're like, look, people in London, really, they haven't forgotten about us, the diaspora hasn't forgotten about us, things like that. And I'm not going to pretend that it's in any way equal in value, but it had a very specific value, and that was what I had the capacity to do. I think that's a very diluted version of my answer.
That's good. That kind of builds on what Kareem said about you do what you can where you are, right? And if that's what you can do. Then what about you, especially since kind of it's all still going on right now and it's very current for you guys?
Yeah, and I entirely agree with everything Kareem and Ola have said. Like 100, 200% agree. Yes, I have a strong impulse to get on a plane and go to Beirut. No, I'm not going to do it because I'm not the right person to this fight. I know what's happening here. There's a lot of work to be done here. It would be, frankly, a bit offensive for me to turn up there and be like, yeah, guys, let's do this. So, yeah.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because I think often the guilt and the stress, and also, I know for me, wanting to make sure I was part of that identity as well, if I hadn't have just been already living in Cairo, that would have just spun my head completely. Thank you so much. I think we have time for a couple of questions, right?
Maybe just two.
Just the two. So if anyone has a question, please put your arms really high so I can see your armpits and know that you're there. Fine, I'm going to go to this lady at the back here, and then I'll go to you here. Please stand up and tell us your name and what your question is.
Hi, Yua. Thank you guys for everything that you said. It was all very amazing to hear. My question is, when it comes to the need for protest art, who needs to hear it, as well as who needs to create it?
Amazing question. Claire, do you want to start that one off?
Yeah, I think the first people who need to hear it are the people who are in the suffering at the hands of the oppression that we have right now. I spent a lot of my life on the border between Italy and France, doing refugee solidarity action basically. And what I realized there was that there were so many people every night at the end of the day, after you had done everything you could in terms of like legal aid or whatever, which is always not that much. People wanted to dance, people wanted music, people wanted poetry, and people wanted theatre. And they were listening to these things, they were looking for these things, and they were making these things. And I think that's the first place that needs to go, because our energy should always be focused first on the people who are at the forefront of the suffering that this world creates.
Amazing. Thank you. Unless anyone has anything specific that they want to add to that, I'm gonna head straight here for that question. Please tell us your name.
Hi, Courtney. Thank you for sharing tonight.
My question is it our elders in the arts' responsibility to teach us how to effectively carry out a successful revolution?
Interesting. Did everyone hear that?
Elders, did you say?
Yeah, so like elders is
Yeah.
in
Like
art,
the older generation,
yeah.
is it their responsibility to teach us how to effectively carry out a revolution?
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting question, especially since for like the Egyptian revolution, a lot of it happened online and on Facebook and on social media. And actually, are we finding new ways to do revolution? And do we do it the old way or do we do it in new ways? Interesting. I'm not going to answer that question. Thank God. Ola, I don't go to you first.
Okay, that's a really good question. I love that question. I think part of it is answered by what Zad was saying earlier. We need to know the history. And especially when it came to the Sudanese revolution, we needed to understand why the previous revolutions failed, what happened, and what led to the people that are currently in power. And I really don't like the word responsibility. I really don't like it. Maybe I'm just projecting my own issues, but I think it's very dangerous to put boxes around people and say, now you need to do this and you need to do that. Yes, of course, we different people have different roles. We need different people to fill all the roles. But I don't feel like they have a responsibility. I think when they share it, it's beautiful. One of the things that I always regretted was not asking my grandmother enough questions, and now trying to go back and ask my aunt and my mom questions about her. And so I think it's important that we learn and we hear and we listen to our elders, but also what they say is not the absolute truth, because everything needs to adapt with how people are adapting. Even the way that we protest, social media, like someone said, revolutions need to adapt, because who's the revolution for? It's for the people who are currently here and for the people who were in the past. So it has to be this ongoing process.
Karim, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I would just add that, learning from the elders is really important in terms of what has happened, and perhaps if we go to Egypt, like why they weren't able to do a revolution before, or what was it? Was it just the price of hash that caused a lot of people to revolt? Like, was there going to be another revolution before Mohamed Salah scored that next goal? Yes, there was probably. But people get there's these are like actual conversations that people don't have in the Egyptian revolution. I remember an older guy. It was one of my favourite things on television. He said, like, I don't want anyone under the age of 45 to open their mouth about anything.
Wow.
And he was an older guy, and because I've just been involved in the Goldsmiths anti-racist occupation, and as someone who's been organising for a long time, to see these amazing, predominantly women, who are like 18, 19, organise a sit-in for nearly 6 months, and basically everyone who was like over 25, 27, just coming in absolute awe. There was nothing that any of those people could have taught them, because when the fight is correct, and when there's only like one option, when they had to be there, they had to be there. Anyone else would have said, oh, you could have done this, you could have done that. No one would have been able to tell them anything. So I think learning, yes, but when it comes to it, the world has changed so much that like there's different tactics, different technology, etc.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Please give it up for the panel.
They did not recognise me in the shadows that suck my colour out of the passport. To them, the wound in me was an exhibit for tourists collecting photographs for sport. They did not recognise me. No, don't leave my hand's palm with no sun, for trees in bloom do recognise me. Every song of the rain recognises me. Don't leave me pale like the moon. All the birds that followed my palm to the doors of the distant airport, all the wheat fields, all the prisons, all the white tombs, all the borders, all the waved handkerchiefs, all the eyes were with me but taken from my passport. Stripped of my name, what am I? On soil I worked with my own hands. Today, jobs cry, filled all the sky, don't make another example of me. Good prophets My good sirs, ask not the name of any tree. Ask not the valley about its mother. From my brow bursts the sword of light, and from my hand springs the river's water. The people's hearts are my identity. Go, take my passport away from me. And that's Passport by an incredible poet. If you don't or you aren't familiar with any of his work, he has like 1 million poetry books out, so you should definitely go and buy them. And buy one for Christmas for someone. I'm going to leave you with a poem Katie asked me to do. And this is a poem called Stories. And I wrote it, and it was born very much out of a frustration that people didn't tell enough stories, so enough knowledge wasn't passed down. And there's always so many things I wish more women had told me more stories, so I knew what to expect, or I could have prepared myself better, because this womanhood is no easy task. I wish more Muslims in the community had spoken up and shared their stories, so I had a different way of learning. And just how powerful the words are and can be, and how much they change us, because I know I'm biased because I'm a writer and a poet, but whatever form we're putting it in, whether we're composing it into music or making songs or poems or writing things on the wall, as we've seen, I think the words are so incredibly powerful. I kind of wanted to write a bit of an ode to that, so I wrote this poem, and that's what it's about, and this is called Stories. I'm going to leave you with this before we hand over to Kareem for a little bit of music to round us all off. So this is Stories. I'm going to pace a lot. Tell me a story. Tell me of the one you really loved. Tell me of the ways in which they broke you and how you, like a restless tide, came back for more. Tell me your favorite story. Tell me of the time you laughed so hard you lit up an entire city. Tell me that story, so that I can see joy crack open your face and plant seeds of happiness in the creases. Tell me your worst story. Tell me of the time depression crept across your chest and took away your voice. Tell me of the things you lost and the emptiness it brings. Tell me about loss, so I can sit and help carry burdens too heavy to bear alone. It's 1 a.m. and the empty restaurant is waiting to close, but my friend and I are too familiar with emptiness to leave now. You see, I believe in the power of the things we say, of the building and breaking, the caring and sharing, the ideas we're spreading, the ideas, the concepts, the threading of me and you in stories worth telling. I believe in the power of the things we say. I believe that the stories we share can change everything, that the stories become the lessons, that it's how we walk through some of our despair. I believe in the power of the things we say. I believe that if voices ring out like church bells, we'll find new ways to be holy. That if I tell you about how we left and love hasn't come knocking since, you'll find new ways to hold me. That maybe all these words we weave together to create blankets of comfort for all the rainy days, the hard days, the sad days, the days my mama told me about, because there will always be days like this. That maybe those blankets become parachutes for softer landings, and the things we say can save us after all. That maybe lips weren't made for bitter lemons. That there's power in a name after all, so hold yours in your mouth like a storm waiting to break. I'll hold on to every word you gave me, pack them into my backpack and give them back when the lightning starts, when the thunder flashes, when the buildings begin to burn, when your home is nothing but ash and you're not sure how to rise again. Then I'll give them back. Give you my back, bent doubled with words you gave me once upon a time. When embarrassment takes over and the shyness holds your tongue in a headlock, I'll help you pull out the words like thorns from your skin. When your boss needs an answer and you don't know what to say, I'll help you come up with a story to make it all okay. When heartbreak knocks on your door, I'll arrive too. Roses in one hand, bunches of words in the other, and we'll use them to sweep away the sadness. We'll use them to put power back in our pockets when we're not sure we've got any left. The things we say will lift us from our knees, will create wildfires, will make gods out of us, and I believe in the power of the things we say. That these things, these stories, they're more metal than words anyway. They're the iron spine that prop us up on days on knees aren't too sure of themselves. They're the metallic taste in our mouth that spark tiny revolutions. They're hashtags turned history. Sometimes they're as tiny as an LOL, but those 3 small letters can make you feel bigger than any main stage comedian. These stories, these words, this metal in our mouth is not just here to keep 32 teeth in line, but rather to shout everything out of order. They're here to fill empty throats, to turn silence from gold to iron because it bends better that way. And what's the use of words if we can't bend them anyway? And I believe in the power of the things we say. That the random conversations that we have in bars and apps and train rides will change how we see the world. That the stories your Uber driver tells you can change your world. How you didn't know homelessness could look like a car seat and how he's driving you home in the only home he has. My Uber ended an hour ago, but we're still here talking about racial politics in LA. And by the time I finally leave, I swear we could be the ones to bring up a new day. And I believe in the power of the things we say. I believe that the stories are looking for us. I find them everywhere. I find them in desert campfires and smoke rings, in cities and glass buildings, in squads and tribes and colleagues, in sweat-drenched sheets and full moons that shine down on men I'll never see again. I find them in offices and jobs and board meetings. I find stories in the most unusual places, mostly the kebab shop at 3 a.m. on any given Friday night. There you'll find the best stories, because there's nothing people won't tell you in the kebab shop at 3 a.m. on any given Friday night. I believe in the power of the things we say. That the words we use can change the people we are. That the stories we share become the bridges that we build. That this is how you create new things. This is how you make a new day. And I believe in the power of the things we say. Thank you very much.
not in the way you reach them. On the other hand, because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect everywhere. 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 You have to expect
So this is a song about a Palestinian woman being beaten by her husband. So he would continue, and she said, let's turn that around. I'm not really down for this, and I'm going to take you to the town square, where I'm going to kick your ass in front of everybody, and they're going to know what's up. So this is called Al-Uf Misha. مشعلاني مع السلامة يا ربا وخلاني القوف مشعلاني ضربك صابر جنب حصار وماني القوف مشعلاني مع السلامة يا ربا وخلاني القوف مشعلاني ضربك صابر جنب حصار وماني مشعلاني مع السلامة يا ربا وخلاني القلوب مشعلاني ضربك صابر جنوب حصار وماني القلوب مشعلاني مع السلامة يا ربا وخلاني القلوب مشعلاني ضربك صابر جنوب حصار
press pause, not whatever, because this is where the problem starts. Because this is what makes you answer all your questions, ask you all your questions. This is exactly where the problem starts. This is a people who is discriminated, is fighting for his rights. This is a story. If you will say it's a civil war, then your questions will be justified. If you will say it's a conflict, then of course it's a surprise to know what's happening. Why would it be a conflict? It's a liberation movement.
علقوف مش علقوف مش علقوف